Hello guys, once again welcome back to another Android application development tutorial. In this video here I am going to create a simple Android application that demonstrate how to place a new user registration and login form in your Android application with the remote database. So here the remote database is MySQL database, and here we are going to use a retrofit for the network transactions. So before going to start the development, here I am going to show you the exact Android app that we are going to make now. So here is the application. So this is our database on the remote server. Here we have a database called the user DB. In that database we have a table called the login info. Now currently there is no informations are available on the database. So here the table contain three columns: name, username and user password. Okay, so now we can open the application on the virtual device. So this is the application. So if you open the application for the first time, it will display a login form. So if you didn't register to the application yet, you can create a new user account by clicking this text view. So from the registration form you can create a new user. So here I am going to create a new user, specify the name of the user. Now specify a username. Now specify a password for the user. Here I specify the password as password123 and click register. So now the application shows registration success. So now we can check the database. So here there is a new user added to the database. This is the name, username and password. So now I try to register the same user again. Now specify the same username, Prabesh123, that is the username, and specify some password and try to register. So here the application shows user already exists on the database. So now we can try to log in. First here I entered some wrong information. So this is wrong information and try to log in. So here the login failed. Now try to enter the valid information. So here the username is Prabesh123. That is the correct username. Now specify the password. Here the password is password123. Now try to log in. So here the login success, and here is a welcome page. So now I remove the application from the memory and try to open the application again. So instead of display login page, it will display the welcome page. Now I try to log out from the application. So now I remove the application from the memory. Now try to log in. So in that case it will display the login page again. So this is the application now we are going to make. So here we are going to perform the user login and user registration with the remote server, and we are going to use retrofit for the network operations. And here I am going to use my local host as web server. In this project I'm going to working with a WAMP server application. So the first thing we have to create the server side components. So we need an API that support user login and user registration. So we need to create the database. We have to place the knee.php script in server side to perform the user login and user registration. So here the WAMP server is already running. So first here I'm going to create the database in localhost. So open browser and type localhost. So this is the home page of WAMP server. Here I'm going to create a database in MySQL. So open PHP myadmin. Here my username is Prabesh. Specify my password. So now I'm going to create a new database here. So create a new database. Specify the database name. Here I name it as userdb. So here the database is created. Now we need to create a table in that database. So here I'm going to create a table with the 4 columns. First one is ID, second one is name of the user, third one is username, and last one is user password. So specify the table name. Here I name it as login info, and that table need 4 columns. Now we can specify the table structure. So the first column is ID. It is of integer type. Specify the length of that variable. I specify that one into auto increment, and that is the primary key. Now specify the second column name. Here it is name. Specify the data type. Specify size. Now here is the third column name. It is username. Specify the data type. Specify the size. And here is the last column name, user password. That is also work here, and specify the data type. Okay, now we can create it. So now here the table is created. Our table contains 4 columns: ID, name, username and user password. So now the database is ready. Now we can start with the server side scripts. So for that, go to the installation folder of WAMP server. Go to the public directory. So for our project here, I'm going to create a new folder called the login app. This is the folder for our application. So here I already created the needed PHP script for server side. So the first thing, we have to establish a connection to the database. For that, here I create a separate PHP script called init.php. I copy that PHP script, place it inside the server. So this is the PHP script that establish a connection to the database. So I will show you the content of this PHP script. So this is the PHP script that we are going to use for establish connection to the database. So here the host is localhost. Here the username, this is the username for the MySQL database. This is the password, and specify the database name. So here our database name is userdb. Userdb, that is the database name. So this is the statement that establish connection to the database. So here we call a function called the MySQL connect. In that function, you need to pass parameters like host name, username, password and database name. So this statement establish a connection to the database and save that connection to this variable called the con. So here we check the connection success or not. So if the variable connection is true, in that case connection success, otherwise it is failed. So before going to use this PHP script, we can test it. So open your browser. So in localhost, we create a folder called login app. In that folder, in that file, our PHP script is init.php, and here it shows connection succeed. So this is success. So now there is no need of this check, it is already succeed. Okay, save it. So this is the PHP script that established connection to the database. Now we need to place another PHP script that perform the new user registration. For that, here I already created the needed PHP script. So this is our script, register.php. I copy that PHP script, place it inside the server folder. So now this is the PHP script that perform the new user registration. So now I can explain that PHP script for you. So this is the PHP script that create a new user. So first thing, we have to establish a connection to the database. That's why we include the file init.php. So here for this file, we need 3 parameters. First one is name of the user, username and user password. That means when a user create a new account, the user has to enter his name, username and user password in the Android application. So the Android application will send a request to the server. That request contain 3 parameters, 3 variables, name, username and user passwords. We save all that information into these variables called the name, username and user password. So first we have to check whether that particular user already registered or not. For that, here I create an SQL statement, select star from login info. This is our table name, where username equal to the variable username. That means if the user already exists in that table, there is some result. So here we execute that SQL by calling this function MySQL query, and the first parameter is the connection and second parameter is the SQL query. So here we check the condition. If the MySQL number of rows of that particular result is greater than 0, that means that particular user is available on the database. In that case, we change a variable status into exist. Otherwise, that means if the user is not available in database, we have to perform the new user registration. For that, here I create another SQL statement, insert into login info, specify the column names and specify the values. Here the values are name, username and user password. Now we need to insert the data. For that, here I use the statement MySQL query. For that function, you need to pass two parameter, connection and SQL query. So if it will return true, that means the database is updated successfully. In that case, the variable status into OK. Otherwise, if there is an error occur, we place the status into error. Now we need to send the information back to the Android application. So here the response from server is a JSON format. So here we create a name value pair, response into status. Now we need to perform the JSON encode. So here the JSON, there is only one JSON object with only one parameter, it is a response. Okay, and finally we close the MySQL connection. So this is the PHP script that create a new user. So before going to use this PHP script with our Android application, we have to test it whether it works fine or not. For that, here I create a simple HTML form. So here I create a simple HTML form called register test. I copy that HTML form, put it in our server. So now I am going to show you the content of that HTML form. So this is a simple form with action register.php. Here the method is get that contain name, username and password. And there is a button called send. So I change that one into register. Okay, so save it. Now we can test our PHP script. The file name is register test.html. Okay, so here I'm going to provide a simple user information. Here the username is Prabish. Now specify the username. Here the username is Prabish123. Specify the password. I specify password as password123 and click register. And this is the response from server. This is a simple JSON object with only one property, response, and value for the response is OK. That means the user registration success. So we can check the database and click the browse button, and here is the new user. Here is the name, username and password. Okay, so now the user registration success. Now I'm going to register the same user again. In that case, we get an exist message from the server. So here I try to register the same user again. In that case, this is the response from server. The response is exist. That particular user already available in database. So now we complete the registration part. Now we can we need to place a PHP script that perform the new user login. User login. So now this is the PHP script for performing user login. I copy that PHP script, place it inside the server. Now I can show you the content of the PHP script. So here also the same thing. First we have to establish a connection to the database. Now we need to get the username and password from the Android app, and here we save the username and password into these variables, username and user password. And now we need to fetch the information from the table. If the user exists, we have to send the Android application the user available, otherwise we can send failed. So here the SQL query is select a name from login info. So we have to send back a name to the Android application to show a welcome message. So here the SQL query is select a name from login info, where username is this variable and user password is this. Now we need to execute that SQL query. So here we call the function MySQL query and pass the connection and SQL query. And if the number of rows of result is greater than 0, that means user already available. In that case, here the if loop, first we put a not symbol. That means If it is true, that means the status is failed. That means user is not available. In that case, we create a simple JSON object called the response, and value for status is failed. That means login failed. Otherwise, we have to send back the response and name to the Android application. So here we have to fetch the raw from the result. So create a variable called raw and fetch the raw from the result. And now we need to fetch the name from the result. For that, here I get the name from the raw. This is the column name, and here I create a variable status, and value for status is okay. That means login is success. Now we perform a JSON encode, and here the JSON object has two properties, response and name. And finally we close the database connection. So before going to use this PHP script with our Android app, we need to check whether it's working fine or not. So here I create another HTML form called I will show you the scripts. Yeah, here it is, login test. So by using this HTML form, we can test the login operation. So now I place it inside the server. Now we can test it. So localhost login app login test.html. So specify the username. So first here I enter some wrong information. The user is now not available, and click login. So here the response from server is failed. The user is not available. So now we have to check the database. Here only one user available with the name Prabish, username Prabish123 and password 123. Okay. So now try to enter some valid data. Here the username is Prabish123 and password is password123. That is correct information, and try to login. So this is the correct information. So this is the response from server. This is a JSON object with the two property, response and name. So here the response is okay. That means user login success. And this is the name of the user, so that we can show a welcome message in our Android application. So this is the server part of our application. Now we can start with the Android application development. Open Android Studio and create a new Android Studio project. Specify your application name. Here I name it as login app example. Select empty activity and click finish. So here the project is created. So first I'm going to specify the needed permission for this application. So this is a login application, so we have to connect to the internet. So this application need the internet permission. This is the only one permission needed by this application. So now here we are going to use a retrofit for established connection to the server. So we have to add the needed dependency for working with the retrofit. So open Gradle file, open module level Gradle file. So these are the two dependencies for retrofit. So here I implement two dependencies, retrofit and retrofit JSON converter dependencies. Okay, now sync the project. So here one thing, here the compile configuration is deprecated from Android Studio version 3.0 and above. So instead of compile, you have to use implementation. Okay, so now we successfully add retrofit. So in this application, we need three pages. First one is a login page, second one is a user registration page, and third one is a success page. So here I am going to use fragments for these pages. So here we need to create three separate fragments. First one is a login fragment, a registration fragment, and welcome fragment. So here I am going to add the needed fragments. So create a blank fragment. I name it as login fragment. So here the fragment is created. Now here I am going to add the needed user interface for the login fragment. Here I already create the needed user interfaces. So this is the user interface for login that contain two edit text, email and password. Here it is not email, here it is username. Okay, so that contain two edit text, username and password, and this is the login button. So if the user is not registered yet, for that here we place a text view for new user registration. So now we can close these files. Now here I am going to add another fragment, create another fragment, specify the fragment name as registration fragment. There is no need of these factory methods, and click finish. Now here I am going to add the needed user interface for the registration fragment. Okay, this is the layout for registration fragment. It contains three edit text, name, username, password, and here is a register button. Okay, so now we need to create a fragment for the welcome page. So here I am going to create the third fragment. Here I name it as welcome fragment. So now I am going to add the needed user interface for the welcome fragment. So this is the layout for the welcome fragment. Okay, so the welcome fragment contains a text view that here we are going to display a welcome message for the user using that text view, and here we place a logout button. Okay, so these are the components of this application. So once the user login successfully, there is no need to display the login page again. That means we have to save the login status of the user. So here I am going to using shared preferences for saving the login status of the user. For that, first thing I have to add some string resources. Open values folder, open strings.xml. Here I am going to add some string resources. I specify the name as preference file. Value for that one is preference file. Now create another string resource, preference login status. Change the value into preference login status. Now here create another string resource. Once the user successfully login, we have to save the username. So preference username. Here it is. preference username. Okay, so now we need to create a shared preference, and we have to save the login status, and if the user successfully login, we have to save the username on the shared preferences. For that, here I am going to create a separate class. I name it as prefconfig. First, here create some variables for shared preferences. Now we need to create a variable for context. Now here I am going to create a constructor for this class, preference config, and the constructor need one parameter. It is an object of context. First, initialize the context variable. Now from the constructor itself, I am going to initialize the shared preferences. So context dot get shared preferences, context dot get string, or dot string dot preference file. Now specify the operation mode. Here it is mode private. Okay, so now I'm going to create separate methods for write login status, read login status. So first create a method for write login status, public void write login status. This method need one parameter. It's a boolean value. I name it as status. So first we have to create an editor for shared preferences. Now we can save the information. So editor dot it is a boolean, put boolean. So context dot get string or dot string dot here it is preference login status. Now pass the boolean value. Here it is status. Now commit the transaction. So this method save the user login status. Now create another method for read the login status. So public, here the return type of this method is a boolean, read login status. Now simply return share preferences dot get boolean, context dot get string or dot string dot preference login status, and specify the default value for the data. Here I specify the default value as false. Okay, so this method read the user login status from the shared preferences. So now I'm going to create another method for write the username. So if the user login success, we have to save the name of the user into the shared preferences. For that, here I'm going to create another method. So public void write name, and this method need one parameter. It is name. Okay, now we can perform the write operation. So editor dot put string, context dot get string or dot string dot preference username, and pass the data. Here it is name. Now commit the transaction. Okay, so this method write the username into the shared preferences. Now I'm going to create another method for read the username. So public, here the return type is string, read name, return shared preferences dot get string context dot get string r dot string dot preference username, and here I specify the default value as user. If the data not found, it will return user. Okay, so these are the two methods for write and read name of the user. Okay, so for here I'm going to add one more method for display messages for this application. So here I'm going to create a method called display toast. So we can display all the messages using this method. This needs one parameter, it is message. Now we display a toast from this method. Display message. Now display that one. Okay. So this is the preference configuration file. In that file we place some methods for write the login status, read the login status, write the name of the user, read the name of the user, and here we place a method that will display a symbol toast. Okay. So here we are going to use Retrofit for the network operations. So now I'm going to specify the files for the Retrofit configuration. The Retrofit need three things. First one is an instance of Retrofit. Second one is an interface that contain all the possible API calls, and third one is a model class. So now I'm going to create the model class. For that we have to check our PHP script. So this is the login PHP. So here the response is a JSON object with one parameter response, and here if the login success, we have another property called name. So these are the two properties of the JSON object, response and name. So first here I'm going to create the model class for the Retrofit. So right click the package, create a new Java class. I name it as user. Here I'm going to create two variables, private string response. Now create another variable name. Okay, so for the proper mapping, specify the serialized name. You can check it. So here it is username. So here it is response and name. So this one response. Here it is name. Okay, so now we need to create the getter methods for these two variables. So now here I'm going to create the getter methods. Okay, so this is the model class for Retrofit. Now here I'm going to create a class that will return an instance of Retrofit. So right click the package, create another Java class called API client. In this class, first I'm going to create some variables, public static final string, base URL. Specify the base URL. Here we are going to test this application on virtual device. So this is the default IP used by all Android virtual device for accessing the localhost 10.0.2.2, and our folder name is login app. So this is our folder name, login app. Okay, so this is the base URL. Now create some variables for Retrofit. Initialize that variable with the value null. Now here I'm going to create a static method that will return an instance of retrofit. So public static, here the return type is retrofit, get API client, so here check some condition. If retrofit equal to null, in that case we have to initialize that one, retrofit equal to new retrofit builder, add the base URL, now add a converter factory, JSON converter factory dot create, and finally call the build method. Now we can return a retrofit object from this method. So this is the class that return an instance of retrofit. Now we need to create an interface that contain possible API calls. So here create another class, another Java class. I name it as API interface. So this is not a class, it is an interface. So here I'm going to specify two abstract methods. First one is perform registration. This method for the user registration. So here the return type of this method is an object of call class. Here the return type is an object of user class. So this is the first abstract method. Now specify the second method. Second method is perform user login. So this is the second method. Here also return type is the same. Okay, now specify the empty URLs. So for registration, specify the empty URL. So here our empty URLs are login.php and register.php. So for registration it is register.php, and for login it is login.php. Okay, now specify the parameters. For that, this is the login form. For login we need two parameters, username and user password. So these are the JSON properties, username and user password. Now we need to check the registration form. So for registration these are the properties, name, username and user password. Okay, now specify the parameters. So for registration, first parameter is name, second parameter is username, third parameter is user password. Okay, now specify the JSON object properties. So use @query. Here it is name, and for the username, here it is username. Now specify the JSON property for user password. Here it is user password. Okay, so now for performing login, we need username and user password. Okay, so perform login we need two parameters, username and user password, and these are the JSON object properties, user password and username. So this is the interface that contain two possible API calls, perform registration and perform user login. Now we can add the fragments to the main activity. First we have to place a fragment container inside the activity main.xml. So here a text view is available, delete that one. Select layouts. Here I drag a frame layout into this layout. Now create the constraints for the frame layout. Here I create constraints on all sides. Okay, so now I'm going to specify an ID for the frame layout. I name it as fragment container. So this is the container for the fragment. So now we can add fragments to the main activity. Okay, so open main activity file, class file. So first here I'm going to create some variables for preference config. Now we can initialize that variable, preference config, pass the context. Okay, so now check the condition if find view by id .id fragment container not equal to null. Now here check other condition if saved instance state not equal to null. That means the activity resume its state. In that case, simply return. Okay. So here we have to check some condition. If the user already login, we have to display the welcome page. Otherwise, we have to display the login page. So here we check the condition if preference config dot read login status. If it return true, that means user already login. In that case, we have to display the welcome page. Otherwise, we can display the login page. Okay. So if the user already login, we can display the welcome page. So get support fragment manager, begin transaction, dot id dot fragment container, and here it is new welcome fragment, and commit the transaction. Okay, otherwise that means if the user not logged yet, we can display the login fragment. So I copy the same statement. So in this case we can display the login fragment. Okay, so before going to do further coding, we can test it. So here one virtual device is ready. We can test it. So run the application. Okay, now the application available on this virtual device. So here the user is not logged in yet. That's why it's to display the login form. So I try to remove that application from the memory and open that application again. So here it will display the login form. Okay, so now we can perform the new user registration and the user login. For that, open the login fragment. Here it is, login fragment. Open the layout. So for display the user registration form, the user has to click this text view. So in that case, we have to display the registration form. So this is the text view with ID register txt. So go to the login fragment. Here create some object of view class and return that view from here. Okay, so now create some variables for text view. I name it as reg text. Now initialize that variable view dot find the view by id or dot id dot here it is, reg register text. Okay, so now create click listener for the variable. So reg text dot set on click listener. So now this fragment need to communicate with the activity. For that, here I'm going to create an interface. So public interface on login form activity listener. So here I'm going to define two abstract method, public void perform register. Now create another method, public void perform login. And for the second method we need one parameter, it is name. Okay, so now we have to create a handler for this interface. So on login form activity listener, login form activity listener, so we can initialize this variable from the on attach method of fragment. On attach, override this method. So create an object of activity is equal to context, typecast this one into activity. Okay, so now we can initialize that handler from that method. Here the variable is login form activity listener. So login form activity listener equal to activity. Typecast that one into on login form activity listener. Okay, so when user click the text view, this method will invoke. So from this method we can call that method. So before going to do that, inside main activity we have to implement that interface on login form activity listener. Implement the method. Here you have to implement these two methods, perform register and perform login. Okay, so now go to login fragment. So by using the handler we can call that method perform register. Now go to main activity. So inside perform register we can display the registration form. So get support fragment manager dot begin transaction replace dot id dot fragment container. Here it is new registration fragment, and add that one into the backstack, add it to backstack, and finally commit the transaction. Okay, so when user click the text view, it will open the registration form, so we can test it. So run the application again. So here if the user click the registration text view, it will open the register form. So now we can perform the new user registration. So now close all these files. Now open the registration fragment, open the class file and open the layout file. So inside the layout, here we have three edit text. First one is name with id txt name. Here is the edit text for username, txt username, txt password, and here is the button with id bn register. Now go to the fragment. So here create some view class object, and from this method return that view. So return view. Okay, so first here create some variables. So private edit text name, username, user password, okay. So now create some variables for button. I name it as bn register. Okay, now we can initialize these variables. So first one is name. So view dot find the view by id or dot id, txt name. Now username, view dot find the view by id or dot id dot txt, it is txt username. Now user password, view dot find the view by id or dot id dot user pass txt, I think it is txt password. Okay, now we can initialize the button. So bn register equal to view dot find the view by id or dot id dot it is bn register. Now create the click listener for the button. So bn register dot set on click listener. Now implement the callback method. Here it is on click. So for the user registration, here I'm going to create a separate method, public void perform registration. First here create some variables, string name, get the name from the edit text. Now get the username, so username dot get the text into string. Now get the password, user password dot get the text into string. Okay, now we can perform the user registration. So we can check the PHP script in server. So this is the registration PHP script. So here we have a response like OK, error and exist. So here the JSON object has only one property called response, and for response we have values like exist, OK and error. So these are the three conditions we have to handle here. So now we can perform the retrofit code. So before going to do that, go into main activity. Here create some variables, public static API interface, and name it as API interface. Now initialize that variable here. So API interface is equal to API client dot get API client, create API interface dot class. Okay, now go to registration fragment. So here we can perform the API call. So here the returned IP is an object of call class that contain an object of user class. So main activity dot API interface dot perform registration. So here you need to pass three parameters: name, username and user password. So first to pass name, username and password. Okay, so now we can get the response from server. So call this method enqueue. Now implement the callback methods. So here we have two methods, on response and on failure. So now we can handle the response. So here we have to handle three conditions. Okay, I will check it again. So here the conditions are OK, error and exist. So these are the three conditions. So first we can check the success condition. So if response dot body dot get the response dot equals OK, that means registration success. In that case we can display a message. So main activity API preference config dot call the method display toast. registration success. Okay, now we can check the second condition, else if response.body dot get response dot equals exist. In that case, again we can display some message to the user. User already exists. Now we can check the last condition. We can check the last condition is error. In that case, display some message, something went wrong. Okay, so after this method, after executing this method, we can reset all the field. So name dot set to text into null, user password dot set to text into null, and final one is username. Okay, and finally we can call that method perform registration. So now we can test our application. Okay, now we can open the localhost. We can open the web server. Here I use a localhost. Go to PHP myadmin. So this is our database. So here the database contains some datas. Now I try to delete all the information in database. Now there is no information in table. Okay, now we can test our application. So open Android Studio, run the project. Okay, now the application available on this virtual device. So now we can test it. So try to register a new user, specify name. Now specify username. Here the username is Prabesh123. Specify password. I specify the password as Prabesh3 password 321 and try to register. So here the information from server is registration success. We can check the database, and here is the user. The user successfully added to the database. Now I'm going to save the same user again. Try to register the same user again with the username Prabesh123. Specify the same username and specify some password. So this user already available on database. Try to register. So this is the response from server. User already exists. Okay, now we can perform the user login operations. So close these files. We need the main activity file. We need the login fragment class file. Open the login layout. This is the login layout. So inside the login form we have two edit text with ID username and user pass. This is the button with ID login bn. So now go to the login fragment.java. So here create the needed variables, private, edit text, username and a user password. Now we need a button, private button. I name it as a login bn. So first we can initialize these variables. So first we can initialize username, view dot find view by id r dot id dot username. Now we can initialize user password, view dot find view by id r dot id user password. Now we can initialize that button. Here the button is login bn. So login bn equal to view dot find the view by id, object id. Here it is login bn. Okay, and here create a click listener for the button. So login bn dot set on click listener. Okay, so here I am going to create a separate method for performing the user login. So private void perform login. First we have to create the username and password from the edit text. Username equal to username dot get the text into string. Now get the password. Password is equal to user password dot get the text to string. So now we can perform the user login. So before going to do that, check the login PHP script. So here the response JSON object has two properties, response and name. The response may be failed and okay. So this is the two condition we have to handle. And here the JSON, if the login success, the JSON object has two property, response and name. If the login failed, there is only one property called the response. The value for that one is failed. So this is the two conditions. So now we can perform the login. So here the returned IP is an object of a user class. Main activity.api interface dot perform user login. Here you need to pass the username and user password. So pass the username, now pass the password. Okay, now we can handle the response, implement the callback methods. So here first we can check the conditions if the login success or not. So if response dot body dot get a response dot equals okay, if the response is okay, we can check it. Yes, it is okay. So in that case, login success. So in that case, we can call the method in main activity called perform login. For that, here we have a handler called login form activity listener. So by using that method, login form activity listener, we can call the method perform login, and we have to pass the name. So we need to get the name from the response. So response.body dot get a name. So at the same time, we have to update the login status in shared preferences. So main activity dot preference config dot write the login status into true. So here the login success. Okay, so now inside main activity, that means if the login success, inside main activity we got the username here. So first here I am going to write the username to the preference file, shared preference. So preference config dot write a name and pass the name. Now here I am going to call the welcome fragment. So get support fragment manager dot begin transaction. So here it is replace r dot id dot fragment container. Now specify the fragment object. Here it is welcome fragment, new welcome fragment, and commit the transaction. Okay, now go back to login fragment.java. So here we handle the success situation. Now we have to handle the error situation. Else if response dot body dot get response dot equals failed. That means login failed. In that case, we can display a toast to the user. So main activity dot preference config dot display toast login failed, please try again. So after executing this method, we have to reset all the forms. So here username dot set to text into null, user password dot set to text into null. Okay, so now we can call this method from the button on click listener. So this is the button on click listener. So from this method we can call the method perform login. Okay, now open the welcome fragment and the corresponding layout. So here we have a text view. By using that text view, we display a greeting message to the user. So here the ID of the text view is txt name info, and here is the logout button with ID bn logout. So now go to the welcome fragment.java. Here create an object of view class and return that object from this method. So return view. So here we have to create two variables. Private text view, I name it as text view. Now we have to create a logout button, private button, I name it as bn logout. Okay, now we can initialize these two variables. Text view equal to view dot find the view by id r dot id dot txt name info. Now we can initialize the logout button. So bn logout equal to view dot find the view by id r dot id dot bn logout. Now create a click listener for the button. So bn logout dot set on click listener. Implement the callback method. Here only one method, on click. Okay, so first thing, if the user login success, we have to get the name of the user from the shared preference, and we can display it on the text view. So text view dot set to text main activity dot preference config dot read name and we can display some greeting message to the user, welcome user. Okay, so if the user click the button, this fragment need to communicate with the main activity. For that, here I am going to create an interface for this fragment. So public interface on logout listener. And in that method, in that interface, we need only one method, public void logout performed. Okay, so now we need to override one lifecycle method for this fragment on attach. Inside on attach, create some variables for context. Sorry, we have to create some variables for activity. Activity equal to context. Typecast this one into activity. So now here inside this fragment, create a handler for the interface. So on logout listener, I name it as logout listener. So we can initialize that logout listener handler from the on attach method. So logout listener equal to activity. Now typecast this one into on logout listener. So now open main activity. So main activity need to implement that interface. So here it is on logout listener. So here we have to implement one method, logout performed. Okay, Now go to the welcome fragment. So if the user click the logout button, we have to call this method. We have to call the method in main activity by using the handler of the interface. So logout listener dot logout performed. Okay. So now go to main activity. So if the user perform the logout, we have to replace the fragment. So get support fragment manager. So instead of the welcome fragment, here we have to display the login fragment again and commit. So at the same time, we have to reset the shared preferences. So preference config dot write the login status into false. Also we can reset the name, write the name into, I simply change the name into simply user. Okay, now we can test our application. Okay, now run the application. Okay, now the application available on this virtual device. So here is our database. Now there is only one user available. Now here I am going to add one more user. Username is Thomas. Name of the user is Thomas. Now specify username into Thomas123. Now specify password. Here the password is password321 and try to register. So the registration is success. So we can check the database. So here is the new user. Here is the username and password. Now we can try to log in the new user. So here the username for Thomas is Thomas123. So specify the username Thomas123 and here the password is password321. Okay, first I try to enter some wrong information. So this is a wrong information. Try to log in. So here the login failed. Now try to log in with the valid information. Here it is Thomas123. Now try to, now the password is password321 and click the login button. So here the login success and here is the welcome message for the user. Sorry for the spelling mistake. So now I remove the application from the memory and try to open the application again. So here instead of display the login page again, it will display the welcome page. Now the user try to log out. So here now the user is log out from the application. So if the user open the same application again, it will display the login form. So now I try to register, try to log in with another username. Here it is Prabish123, password321. Okay, try to log in. So now the second user successfully logged in. So this is how we create a simple user registration login form in your Android application using Retrofit and a web server. I hope you understand all these concepts. For getting more Android tutorial updates, please subscribe this channel. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.